Hi children, welcome to our next class. Last class you learned about moon and the surface of the moon, how the moon changes its shape, means phases of the moon, this all you learned. And how the surface of the moon, what are craters means, how these craters formed, and about gravity, this all you learned. And in today's class, we are going to learn what happens when any object comes in the way of light. You know that if anything which comes in the way of light, if that object is transparent or translucent or the opaque object, we have to see. And you know that a opaque object means which does not allow light to pass through them. So, you know that a cardboard is an opaque object, so it does not allow the light to pass through it. Same way, our earth and the moon are also opaque objects. So, whenever the sunlight fall on moon and earth, like opaque objects, so their shadow will form. So, whenever the earth is coming in way of the light, sunlight, so the bright light falls on it, so it is the opaque object, so the moon shadow will fall on the earth. In the same way, when the earth comes in the middle, earth shadow falls on moon. When moon comes in the middle, moon shadow will form on earth. So this is only known as eclipse. So how the eclipses are formed and how they are different from each other, that we'll see in today's class. So here you can see in the picture very clearly how what actually needed when an eclipse occurred. Compulsory, the earth, sun and the moon, all these three should be in a straight line, then only an eclipse is formed. There are two types of eclipses can form. One is lunar eclipse and the other is solar eclipse. So when the earth comes in between the sun and the moon, when the earth comes in between the sun and the moon, you can see in this picture very clearly the earth is blocking. The earth came in the way of light, so that partial earth can't be seen from the moon. So it blocked. The shadow of the earth is formed on the moon. So this is called a lunar eclipse. When the earth comes between the sun and the moon in a straight line while revolving around the sun. So the earth casts its shadow on the moon. The earth is forming its shadow on the moon. So it blocked the light of the sun to reach the moon. Hence the moon cannot be seen partially or wholly. This is called a lunar eclipse. So the moon cannot be seen. Either it may be partially or completely can't be seen. That's called as a lunar eclipse. So who is there in the middle in lunar eclipse? The earth is in the middle. It's coming into whose way of light? The sun's way of light. When the sun is giving us light, on this way of light, the moon is coming. So the moon is in between, the earth is in between the moon and the sun. So the part of the shadow that totally block the sunlight is called the umbra, and which is the part of the shadow that blocks only a part of the light is called penumbra. Umbra and penumbra, if it completely blocks the light, that is called umbra. If it partially blocks the light, that is called penumbra. So you can see This picture, umbra and penumbra, how they formed when it is partially blocking the light, partially shadow formed. Here the earth is partially blocked. So where the blocked area, that is called umbra, and where the light is falling, this is called penumbra. Umbra and penumbra are formed in lunar eclipse. And opposite to this is when the moon comes in between the sun and the earth, that is called solar eclipse. You can see here the sun, the earth, in between moon came. The size of the moon is shown in the picture very small, so it is coming in between the sun and the earth. So the sun's light is falling on the moon, so the moon shadow is formed on the earth. So this is called for solar eclipse. When the moon hides the sun completely, it is called the total solar eclipse. When the moon hides the sun completely, when it completely blocks the sun, it is total solar eclipse. No sunlight reaches to the earth and it becomes totally dark even during the daytime. So when moon hides the sun partially, it is called partial solar eclipse. It occurs only on the new moon day. Only new moon days where we can see partial solar eclipse. Even we can see the complete solar eclipse even in daytime too. So completely become dark because the moon covers the total sunlight so that its shadow will form on the earth. You should never look at the sun directly during the solar eclipse. It can damage our eyes, so we should not look at the sun when solar eclipse takes place. So now in brief we'll see the differences between solar eclipse and the lunar eclipse. When the moon comes, you now clearly understood, children. See, this picture will give you a clear idea who is in the middle. When you remember who is in the middle, remaining part you know very well. If any opaque object comes in the way of light, its shadow forms. That is the scientific principle behind the eclipse formation. So the first one is lunar eclipse. Who is there in the middle in lunar eclipse? In the lunar eclipse, the moon, the in the lunar eclipse, the earth is in the middle, whereas in the solar eclipse, the moon is in the middle. Yes, moon casts its shadow on earth. The people in certain parts of the earth cannot be seen the sun at all or see it only partial for some time. This is called solar eclipse. And now you can see here, this is a lunar eclipse picture when the earth comes in between the sun and the moon, then the earth shadow forms that causes for lunar eclipse. You can see both the pictures. We'll keep it in slideshow mode so that will be easy for you to see. See, the moon comes between the earth and the sun, that forms the solar eclipse. When the earth comes between the sun and the moon in straight line while revolving around the sun, the earth casts its shadow on the moon. It blocks the light of the sun to reach the moon. Hence, the moon cannot be seen partially or wholly. This is called a lunar eclipse. You can see the formation and the revolution, how they are in the straight line. You can observe, children, the earth's shadow, how it appears on the moon, and when how they are coming in a straight line. With this GIF image, you can understand very clearly how a lunar eclipse is formed. Yes. Now you can see the GIF image of solar eclipse, how the moon is coming in between the earth and the sun, and how a straight line forms, and how it is blocking the light of the sun, and how the image shadow is formed on earth in solar eclipse. You can observe by observing these two GIF images. Understood? Now we will see how actually the tides are formed. Tides are caused mainly by the gravitational pull on the moon. Due to the gravitational pull, the level of water rises up and goes down twice every day. Due to the gravitational force on the moon, the ocean water, the sea water is pulled and goes back. So, this regular rising and falling of the level of water in the seas or oceans is called the tides. So, the tides are of two types, high tides and low tides. This picture is actually not given here. This is the artificial satellites, how they are revolving around the sun is given. Before that, you should also understand about the tides. The tides are occurring due to the gravitational pull on the moon. Because of these high tides and low tides, only people can see and get some benefits from these tides. Every day, the rotation of the earth causes two high tides and two low tides. So, the tides of the ocean vary with the phases of the moon. The highest tide occurs on the full moon and the new moon days. On new moon day, full moon day, highest tides, very high tides will appear. Why? Because there is gravitational pull will become little risen on these days. 1 by 6th of the earth's gravity, the gravity will be on the moon. This you learnt in before class. There are useful to ships. Tides are very useful for the ships for their movement. When they are in a high tide, there is enough water to let the ships to come easily to the sea shores or the ocean shores when they are traveling. And the knowledge of the tide is also important for the fishermen before going out for fishing. So when there is low tide, better they can go for fishing. And when there are high tides, the weather department, based on these artificial satellites, they give the information to the fishermen whether they can go for fishing or not. So these are the satellites which revolve around the planets. And before class, you learnt that the natural satellites are revolving around the planets. Yes, so moon is a natural satellites. In the same way, the astronauts are sending the artificial satellites to collect the information about different planets. So they revolve around the planets and made by man. That's why they are called artificial satellites. They are of three types: weather satellites, communication satellites. So weather satellites gives us information about weather forecasting, when the rains may occur, when the wind blows, this all. So, when we know about all this well before, we can save the people from natural disasters. And communication satellites helps us to see the events from so far countries. We are sitting in India and watching the events which goes on in other countries is possible by the artificial satellites. And in coming class we'll see that how these satellites are launched into the space, how space shuttle is, how the astronauts goes into space, and how they travel, what they eat, how they spend in the spaceship, space station is what, and what they'll use to send these artificial satellites. You might have seen the rockets by artificial satellites launching will be telecasted in the television, and how they are sending these satellites into the space we'll discuss in coming class in detail. Thank you.